everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell. We have guests from the community coming on, and today we're lucky enough to have Eileen Christelow. Eileen is the author and illustrator of many best-selling picture books for children, which have received multiple awards and honors over the last 40-plus years. She's created over 30 books, at least, that have been read and reread and reread. You yourself might recall The Mischief and Mayhem of Five Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed, The Great Pig Escape, or Desperate Dog's Letters, or Jerome the Babysitter. The list goes on. So welcome, Eileen.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show.
Good.
Yeah, and it was a real delight going back and looking at some of your books and refreshing my memory of them and reading them.
Great.
As a kid, I read this, I think, on your website, that you did a lot of reading, but you also had a collection. You kind of had your own library.
Yes, I did. And I alphabetized the books and loaned them out to friends, and that was my library.
It was your library,
yeah.
And you cataloged them.
Yes.
Yes. I love that because I did the same thing.
Oh.
As a child, as a kid, when I was, I don't know, probably 8 or 9. And of course, one of the big pulls for that was having a stamp. And so
I didn't have a stamp.
You didn't have a stamp?
No.
Oh.
If only.
The due date, yeah. That
Right.
was, yeah. And so I would, my friends would have to bring them back. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. You did a lot of traveling. Your dad's job took you to different places in the world.
Well, it took us to Japan.
Japan.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that was about, and he was British,
Yeah.
so we went to England.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up until 10 in Washington, D.C.,
Oh.
and my dad worked for the British Treasury there.
Uh-huh.
And so when he switched jobs to an American company, then he had home leave, and we went to England.
Oh.
Met my grandparents for the first time, and
Uh-huh.
cousins. And then maybe 4 years later, I think, we went to Japan
Uh-huh.
for a year.
For a year. How old were
Yeah.
you then?
So I must have been 13, 14.
Oh, so you remember being
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Did you like it?
And I loved Japan.
Yeah.
And we lived in Tokyo, and we traveled around Japan a bit.
Uh-huh.
And then when we were supposed to go back to the U.S., my mom decided that she and I and my brother would take a trip around the world. And we were supposed to stop in India, but there was some illness or something going on. So then she thought we'd go to Lebanon, and there was a war going on. But we did fly in an old DC-7 or whatever they were called. It took a long time to get into it stopped a lot. So we went to Hong Kong, we stopped in Hong Kong, and then it flew to, I can't remember where, but
Yeah.
every time we would come in for a landing, it would be a very long time, and you could really see that.
Oh.
I could see these rice paddies and people with buffalo and plowing.
You got a great bird's eye view.
Right. And the Egyptian pyramids.
Oh,
So
wow.
those at sunrise, and so that, and finally landed in Geneva. And so it wasn't the exotic trip,
Yes.
or the interesting trip that my mom had hoped for.
Yeah.
but,
You really, you did flyovers, a lot of flyover, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Very interesting way to see the world, though. You went to the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And you were studying architecture.
Yes, I really wanted to do art. Architecture seemed like a way to earn a living.
You got into photography around that time,
Yeah,
right?
I did street photography, and I also did architectural photography. as a way of earning a living, since
Right.
I kind of knew what these architects were trying to do with their, or what they wanted to see of their buildings.
Right,
And
what angles were,
Yeah,
yes, the most
yeah.
appropriate. Well, you were also published in a lot of periodicals. You were in the New York Times Book Review, your photographs.
maybe one photograph
Oh.
in the entire.
It still counts. Progressive Architecture, the Ford Foundation, Pennsylvania Gazette, and various textbooks too. So
Yeah,
you're making
yeah.
a living
Yeah,
being a photographer.
of a kind of, but it was, you could certainly pay the rent on it because we found very cheap places to rent.
Yes.
And, oh,
And this is where you met your husband.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Aaron Holtz,
Yes.
who's a very accomplished potter,
Yes.
among other things.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
And during that time, Eileen, with photography, I know that you mentioned that so much of it was you're observing people and kids.
Mm-hmm.
And does that relate to you moving into illustration?
I don't know. I think that in ways what made me move into illustration was I was living in a neighborhood. My husband and I rented a loft in North Philly, and there were a lot of kids who lived in the neighborhood, and I'd park the car and the kids would all converge. A lot of the life of the kids was on the streets,
Yeah.
just playing and having a good time. So I started thinking it would be fun to do a whole story for these kids that they could read and see, and so I started thinking, okay, how do you do a story with photographs? I mean, you can do a documentary with photographs, and I was also photographing at the local school, so I would go there almost every day for maybe about a month, and then I did a sort of exhibit in the playground of the photos of the kids. It was a parents' night, and so the parents came and they could see what their kids had been up to.
Yeah, yeah.
So I got to know the kids pretty well. But I found that doing the kind of picture book that I wanted to do was not working with photos. And so then I decided, around that time, John Steptoe came out with a book called Stevie, and it was a beautifully illustrated and wonderful story, and it was a story for the kids in my neighborhood. It was a neighborhood kid, and so I looked at that and I thought, well, maybe I could do a story about these kids drawing with drawings. So I started doing some drawings, and they weren't bad, but it just it was obviously going to be a huge project, and I still had to earn a living with photographs and so forth. So and I had no clue how to get published, or although I had been going to magazines, but the book publishing world was another thing. And it was all up in New York City, not in Philadelphia. I sort of knew you should put a dummy together, sort of a mock-up of the book. I had that idea. I had no idea that most picture books are 32 pages.
Oh.
And that you have to fit it all into 32 pages.
Huh.
If I'd looked at books a little more closely and counted the pages, I might have known
I never knew that before.
As I was doing photography and sort of occasionally working on this book, then my husband got the opportunity to go to England and work with Michael Cardew, who's a well-known British potter, was. And so off we went to England, and as it happened, I happened to be pregnant. So we had our daughter Heather in England while he was, so Michael Cardew got more than he was bargaining for.
And you had a kinship with England as well,
Yes,
through your father.
yes, right,
yes,
right.
yes. And so you come back, and what happened to publishing at that point?
So we moved to California and Berkeley, and my husband started his pottery. At that point, I had this child, and I started showing her books, and I started understanding picture books more. So my education was really from reading picture books to my daughter Heather.
Yes.
And kind of seeing what she liked and what I liked, and what she would choose from the library. And, so I started working on Henry and the Red Stripes, and I started working on Mr. Murphy's Marvelous Invention. There were some wonderful courses at the University of California, run by a woman named Mae Durham Rogers, and she invited people like Maurice Sendak, and I should remember other names, but I particularly liked him, and I'd also been really looking at his work. And, and he was kind of a great influence, not personally, but as I looked at his books, I thought, I like that line. And how did he do that? And so then I would figure out, did he use a pen or a pencil, or and so I'd kind of experiment. And I didn't want a line exactly like his, but I liked the way it came out on paper. Then I took a course with a woman named Betty Bacon, also through the university, and she had been a children's book editor at Harper. And so she read the Henry book, and she said, "This is good, but it has too much of an Esalen message at the end."
Esalen?
Esalen, being that I don't know too much about Esalen, but it was one of those sort of feel-good.
It was one of the New Age centers,
yes,
in California.
Yeah. So I thought, really? So I thought about the ending, came up with another, and she said, much better. And so then I just put that aside and started working on Mr. Murphy's Marvelous Invention. The class ended. There were a few of us who wanted it to continue, so she said, well, come on over, and we'll once a week and to my house, and we'll continue. And so we did. And so it was like having an editor who, for all 3 or 4 of us who did, and I lost track of the other folks. I have no idea whether they also got published or
That's very interesting. So you had a real mentor right there.
And I didn't learn much about illustration from her, but I did about storytelling.
People want to know, where you get your ideas and things like that. And my question around that is, which comes first for you, or are they simultaneous, the story and the illustrations, or the character? And maybe that changes depending on the book as well.
I think the story kind of has to. Sometimes it can be, I might be doodling, and there's some character who I kind of like, so in that case it might be a picture. But really, for me, to start a story, I kind of need to have a sense of where it could go.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized as you do a story, as you write a story, it can go in all sorts of directions. Well, there were the monkey books, but you know, the monkeys jumping on the bed was one that was a well-known rhyme, and so that was an easy. The plot was there, and I just added a few things of my own.
Yeah.
The detective doggedly character. Where's the big bad wolf? So that started as I thought I could do sort of a takeoff on the three little pigs. They've grown up and they're going to go build their own houses, and we all know what happens with it.
Right.
Some mysterious creature who's blowing them down.
Yes.
I added this detective, doggedly, who's a dog, obviously.
Yeah. Great name for detective.
And so that helped make it my story,
right,
rather than
right.
But it was nice to have that bit of plot line going.
Yes, as an anchor. To keep you grounded in that.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I was thinking about, especially with just, I think, pretty much all of your books, is there's such a sense of mischief going on. And I know kids love that. Kids love mischief. They love silliness. You know, and picture books are that age. What do you think it is about that?
Why do the kids like silliness?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I go back to when I was a kid, and I probably did too. Although the books that I remember, Madeline, there's some silliness in that, but
not that much,
not really.
Yeah.
And the other one that we loved as kids was The Kings and Queens of England.
Oh, my.
With these rhymes about some of these kings. Henry VIII had how many wives?
Right. Yes, yeah.
But so silliness, I don't know. I like silliness.
Yes.
So,
I think we all do, and I think that it just struck me, you know, looking at your books and seeing, you know, oh, these kids are everybody's getting in trouble, and then they get out of trouble. You know, how do they get out of trouble? But that is something that really appeals to kids, and I hadn't really thought. It's an obvious thing, but I hadn't really thought about it before. I do have to say one thing and I shared this story with you, but your book, The Great Pig Escape. I was working at Heartstone Books in Putney one day, and I can't remember who it was. One of us looked out the window and said, "Oh my God, you've got to see this." And so we all rushed to the window, and there was a red truck with a bunch of pigs in it, pulled up to the general store, which is right out of one of your books.
Yes, right.
So it was like, oh my God, this is so incredible. And I don't think I knew at that time that you were living so close by, or we would have called you, because you were only a couple miles away.
Right.
You've done a couple of nonfiction books for kids, probably because you got so many questions about, well, how do you write a book?
Yes,
right? Kids asking, what do authors do? What do writers do? What do illustrators do? So you did that one. And then you did one called Vote! Exclamation point. Could you talk a little about those two?
I did one about robins, too.
Yes.
So for nonfiction, but the illustrator and author book came from going to school visits and saying, you know, and teachers wanting me to explain what it was I did. I wanted to give teachers something that was useful that they could use but I also wanted it to be not dull and dry, but be humorous. And then Vote, I was talking to kids on election day, and they were very concerned. I think I was in Minnesota, and they knew I came from Vermont. So how did you vote? Did you vote? you voted, so who did you vote for? So
Yep.
it was a lot of conversation about, and I thought, maybe I could do something again that would be useful to teachers and fun for kids. And so I had my dog characters and
It's,
to sort of help mix things up a bit. I was at some teacher conference, and the book had just come out, and one of the teachers stood up and said, I read that book, and now I've never voted before, but I am going to vote. And I just thought, okay, so this works for
that's wonderful. And
adults as well as
it's so great. A lot of times a children's book will explain things in a way that's much more accessible to grown-ups than having to go into a big technical thing. I do want to mention, Eileen, that you have a great website. You have what I would call a really generous website. You have not only all of the information about yourself and your books and the characters in the books, but you offer a lot of resources for teachers and writing groups, for kids, and activities. Really great activities that kids making their own bed that the monkeys can jump in out of the Kleenex box, and showing them how to draw a monkey, and Emma's interviews, one of your characters, the dog, who does interviews, which she did several. And there's just, looking through it, I thought, oh, this is offering so much to readers and kids, but definitely to the classroom and to teachers. So we'll have the information at the end of the show about that, so people can visit. And also, I don't know if you still do this, but you had an illustrators group of local illustrators for a while.
Right. So we had, it started actually more as a writers group with some local people who, Karen Hess, and Liza Ketchum, and who was now in Boston and Dorset, and Bob McLean. Then I decided, okay, I would like an illustrator group. And so I called a bunch of people I knew actually in the state. So Tracy Campbell Pearson, who was up near Burlington, and John Stadler, who's in the Hanover area, and Wendy Watson.
Yes.
And so we had, Cindy and I would have parties for the illustrators.
That's so
but
great.
Then, so we got to know each other, and then we decided to do a group where we'd meet maybe once every 6 weeks. People changed over the years, and then Anna joined us, who was quite a bit younger.
Yes,
than us,
Llama Llama Books,
yes,
Anna Dudney.
she was great, and she and I would drive up to the meetings together, and so it was just a great way to talk about publishing.
Yes.
And so.
Yeah, and did you talk also about, as it happens in writing groups, about expressing yourself, your own self-expression through your art and through your stories?
We would, I don't know that we would say, this works, this doesn't work. That sort
critiquing?
Of, yes.
Oh,
critiquing.
Great. A wide range also of talents as well.
But it's down to 4 because Anna died, Wendy died.
Yes, yeah. And Wendy Watson did a lot of Putney things as well. Yeah, a lot of references to Putney.
Yeah.
What do you like to read, Eileen?
I have found graphic novels kind of interesting.
Excellent, yeah.
I don't read a lot of them, but it's really interesting to see how one illustration leads to the next, because what picture book illustration is really telling a story in pictures. And so with telling a story, a picture book story, you pare it down to the words that tell the story, tell it in an interesting way, but you also need the picture that is going to make you want to turn the page. I read a lot of nonfiction, and I also love mysteries, so history and mystery.
History and mystery, yeah. Do you have a few favorite mystery writers?
I love Donna Leon.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
And right now I'm reading Kate Atkinson.
Yes.
The Jackson Brody.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
I forgot about her. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, I've discovered where the mystery section is in the Brattleboro Library.
You know what mysteries are really fun, and this is going back, you're probably familiar with the Rex Stout mysteries. Rex Stout was the author. Nero Wolfe is the character. Oh, they're fabulous. They take place in 30s New York City.
Okay.
And it's a whole deal, and there are lots of them, and they're just captivating. Yeah,
Okay,
they're really fun.
I will look for that.
Yes. One last thing, Eileen, is that recently, I think in February, you had a show at CX Silver Gallery.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool thing, right?
Yeah. It was interesting to do, a lot of work, but I had to pull out illustrations that I've had sitting around. They were relatively well cataloged. I've talked to other authors. Sometimes you don't actually remember what that book was. What happened to that for 20 years ago? And so I became reacquainted with all of these books that I'd done over the last, how many years did you say?
Well, yeah, we're talking over 40. We're saying.
Yes.
It's like old friends, though, right?
Yeah.
Seeing them again.
Yeah, and in some cases I thought, hey, not bad. Obviously, I couldn't use all of the books, but
that's because you've done over. We're saying close to 60 books. That's why.
30.
Okay.
So, you know, there just wasn't room for all of it.
Eileen, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
I really want to thank you for being, an illustrator and author that's really affected kids and parents, and being able to sit with your child and read a story and to have that connection. And you are of really kind of great renown for that, you know. Many stories, and many that, again, have been read and reread and reread. And the characters are all wonderful and, very accessible for both parents and children. So thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you.
Yes, and thanks for being on this show.
Yes.
It was great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for joining us today with Eileen Christelow. I, again, really recommend that you check out her website, and that information is coming along as soon as I stop talking. We're so glad to have Eileen come on, and check out her books as well. If you're a parent or a grandparent, take your little kid to the library, or buy the books locally, even better. Both are good, both are good. So thanks for joining us today. We'll be back again next time with someone else from the community coming on, and we will see you then.